Here we are. I'm Captain Stephen Fields. I appreciate y'all all attending the webinar tonight, sponsored by ZMAN, co-marketed by ZMAN. Of course, one lucky live attendee tonight will be getting a free goodie bag from ZMAN as well as a ZMAN fishing hat. This is inshore fishing tactics for cooler weather. It's kind of weird because it's gotten a little warm lately, but we're still due a couple cold fronts, and that's definitely what we'll be focusing on as well as we get into spring. So we'll go ahead and get started. A little bit about myself. Again, I'm Stephen Fields, full-time professional saltwater guide as well as redfish tournament angler, based out of Charleston, South Carolina, but I fish pretty much anywhere there's a redfish. Feel free to visit my guide site, charlestonfishingcompany.com, or my personal site, fieldsfishing.com as well. So inshore fishing tactics for cooler weather. Presentation will last approximately 30, 40 minutes, somewhere in there. And then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. Leave enough time for that so I can get to all your questions and answer to the best of my ability. Late winter, early spring, don't quit fishing due to the cold or a cold front. I know we all want to stay in bed at times when it's nice and cold out, but it's not too bad usually during those pre-front conditions, and that's really when you want to get out. Like I mentioned, fish ahead of an incoming cold front, areas to target, what to look for, and bait selection and presentation. Then we'll get to questions and answers. So don't miss out. I mean, there's schooled up redfish on the flats. There's speckled sea trout, and they're bunched together, especially in this late winter, early spring. They're going to be bunched together in the cooler temps with the fronts and everything as well. Fish ahead of an incoming cold front. Like I mentioned, we're definitely focusing on this. Cold fronts, they equal cold air, cold water, and pressure changes, big pressure changes. And this pressure is going to start dropping before a cold front. And, of course, fish sense the changes, and they're smarter than we give them credit for a lot of times, and they're going to feed more aggressively, more times than not on a pre-front. And, like I said, just keep an eye out for the weather. Get out a day or two before the front. You won't regret it. It's a great time to get on a feeding frenzy type of bite with these fish. They're lazy, not really lazy. I'm not making fun of my redfish and my sea trout. But when these pre-fronts come through, they're more opportunistic. They're going to feed aggressively. They're not going to pass up the chance to fatten up before that front comes in, dirties up the water. And during these pre-fronts and front conditions, I'm definitely, just like wintertime, going to look for shallow saltwater flats, especially on the sunny days, because the water's going to warm up faster. Here in Charleston, we've got pluff mud on the flats. That's going to warm up real quick. South Florida, you got the grass. That's going to warm up real quick as well. Gulf Coast, tons of mud, sand, grass, hyacinth, stuff like that. That warms up real quick. And the bait fish will move into the warmer water as well. So what follows bait fish and eats bait fish? The predator fish, such as redfish and trout. And the mud flats and grass flats, again, they're going to warm up a lot faster, so that's where I'm going to focus. If I'm targeting new water, which I never hesitate to do, I'm always exploring and always learning. Just like I show here on this map, the green is going to be a flat, and it's mostly mud with a little bit of sand and a lot of oysters. Those warm up quick as well. They're going to hang real tight to oyster bars if you've got that in your area. And like I said, the green notates the area being a flat. And when I'm looking at a map, I like to see, deep water access to a flat. And you can see with the contour lines I've got going on there, they got quick, deep water access when they need it due to the moving tides. And it really just makes this spot real well. You can see how this flat comes out into a point as well and really drops off into that deep water access. They've got plenty of creeks back in there. There's 3 feeder creeks that feed this flat. That's always a good sign for me when I'm looking for an area as well, especially a shallow water area, no matter what time of the year it is. I kind of go by 3 sisters is what I call it. Any area that has 3 feeder creeks that feed a flat tends to be a spot that I'll check out. And, it's not going to be every one of them pans out, but you know, 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 pan out, and that's worth it in the end. So three sisters technique, don't forget that. But I like an afternoon high falling tide, especially for a pre-front or a cold front that's already in, because it's going to allow the weather and the sun to warm up this shallow water. Doesn't mean you can't get out at any other tide. That's just my preference. But I like any moving water in general. As long as I can get a little high and a little low water at some point, I'm good with it on any day. And it's going to, like I said, give the ample time for the sun to warm the grass and the mud and the oysters. And the fish are going to linger in these areas until the water cools, which is usually later in the day. But they're going to get a lot happier. I've come up on some spots early in the morning in front condition, and they're not really spooky. They're just very lethargic and slowly swimming around. They really can care less that I'm there, but they can care less about the baits I'm pitching at them too. But I'll come back to that spot later in the afternoon when it's warmed up, and it's a totally different ball game. I mean, I'll see them crashing some mullet, a little bit more aggressive. So you just have to change up what you're doing throughout the day. But the pre-front conditions is going to be a great time to get out there and target these flats such as these. On cloudier days, due to these cold fronts coming in and the cooler weather, cooler water temperatures, cloudier days doesn't mean I won't hit the flats, but being sight fishing is down to 0 a lot of times on cloudy days. I'm going to look for a little bit deeper water, and that can be deeper flats or in and around flats. And but deeper inshore water equals warmer water as well, kind of like us when it's nasty outside, cloudy, possibly rainy, you know, we're going to stay inside. The deeper water is there inside. They got their little recliner down there and everything, waiting to pounce on those fish, being opportunistic. And fish are lazy but not stupid, like I mentioned earlier. They know when to migrate to deeper channels and warmer water with these fronts coming in. We don't give them enough credit. They are very smart creatures. They were designed to be that way. Deep holes and creek mouths, bends, etc. I definitely like looking for like a deeper creek, such as the image on the left next to a flat that is very productive. And you can see that deep water access right there coming around the points. It's a really great area to target. The one on the right is going to be a hole, pretty drastic hole in the bend of a creek. Some bigger reds will lay up in there. The trout will lay up closer to the edges where there's some trees and structure. So those are good areas definitely to target for your cloudier days. You can hit a little bit of both, of course. I definitely wouldn't rule out the deeper flats as well, but this deep water stuff can be real key, especially for trout. I can go to both of these spots, you know, probably today or yesterday, because we got a front coming through, a serious front with some serious wind, and it's going to cool off a little bit. And you know, even though we've had a little bit of problem with the cooler weather this winter with the trout, I could still have a successful day with the sea trout there, as well as some reds in this hole as well. So those are just definitely some good areas to look for with different conditions. And going back to what's going on this weekend, we got that big front coming through. It's going to be blowing. And wind always plays a big part, whether it's a front or just a normal day in the summer or winter or fall, it doesn't matter. Wind plays a big part, and it really helps me to decide where I'm going to look for fish. I'll eliminate water real quickly and target the water that I know is going to be productive. And you can see at the image below, the arrows are blue. That's going to be the direction of the wind. The red arrows is going to be where your eddies are. It helps. You know, with the wind can dominate the day, but it can create fishing opportunities. And by creating fishing opportunities, I mean eddies and, you know, calmer water that's going to be behind wind-blown points and structure like that. I'm going to look for leeward banks that are going to get direct sunlight, and it's going to offer warmer water because the sun's going to warm it up a lot quicker. And fish are going to tend to avoid wind-blown banks directly. I'm talking about, you know, what I'm talking about when you've seen, you know, a higher tide on a bank and waves are just crashing, sea foams over there. They're going to avoid that portion, but they're going to take advantage and use the eddy side of these wind-blown points to take position for an opportunistic feeding when the bait gets pushed by, because the bait's going to be confused as well in the current movement from the wind and the tide. And you can see from the wind direction, there's this little island that's off the bank here with a feeder creek. And these fish will normally sit at the mouth right there where this wind's getting blown directly down on. But when it's a real windy day, these trout and redfish are going to tend to sit behind these points and these eddies where I have the arrows. The very far right arrow on your screen is definitely going to be a trout spot, a little bit deeper water. The middle arrow, another trout spot, a lot deeper water access. The reds, they're going to tend to hang out in that 1 to 3 foot range where that far left arrow is. That's where they're going to sit, on the eddy side of that feeder creek, that tidal feeder creek right there. That's just a simple way I go about it. And I'll put certain waypoints on using my boating app that Navionics has out. Great little app. You can, I can share it with my plotter, everything I mark up on it, and I mark it up. I will actually, not these particular symbols, but I'll use different symbols on the on my chart plotter for where I'm going to target certain areas, where I think the eddies are going to be, especially when I'm covering new water. And it's just a great and helpful tool. If I create some waypoints on my boating app, I can use Plotter Sync. It can share it directly with my plotter, and I have all the information I need. Covering water. Like I said, I'm not afraid to cover new water. Be open to fish new water, especially if you have some time off, just hitting the same old, same old. It's always good to go out and fish some new water. We all have in the back of our minds, man, I've never hit that particular spot, or I've never explored it like I should have. And use what you already know. And apply that knowledge to new areas. Like I talked about the flat with the three sisters technique that I came up with in my own crazy mind. Any flat that's fed by 3 tidal creeks, feeder creeks, whatever you would like to call them, that's just an area that I like. And you can look all over the Southeast and find areas that have that all over the place. Charleston probably has 1 million of them. And I'm just using the prior knowledge I have, looking at new spots and what works. And it's an effective way to go about it. Now we're down to bait selection and presentation. And presentation definitely does matter. Slow down. Definitely slow down your retrieval speed. You don't have to blaze it past these fish, speed it up in any way. Slow is the ticket this time of year, especially with these cold fronts coming through. And they will pounce on it, and they'll appreciate you running it slow. Everything slows down during the front, even the bait. So I downsize my bait the best I can to match smaller finger mullet or minnows. And I'm using the lightest weight setup that I can get the slowest bait fall with. And doing that, I'm using ZMAN soft plastics, of course, minnows or swimmers or curly tails. And they have natural buoyancy to them due to the Elastec technology that ZMAN uses. So it's a great setup for using a jig head or a weighted swim bait hook, because it's going to fall a lot slower and softer than it would for a normal soft plastic bait that wouldn't have this buoyancy due to the Elastec technology. And it just creates a great setup for targeting these fish during these fronts. Again, it's just a great slow bait fall presentation. I know guys that have nothing to do with Z-Man. They don't use it a lot, but when it comes to a slow presentation, their time went on. It's a great bait for that. Natural colors in clear water. So this time of the year, so your tans, your solid whites, and your brighter colors in dirty water, such as your electric chicken, chartreuse, or something like that. Opaque, translucent. Opaque's going to be more solid, natural. When I go brighter, I use more translucent baits, which light is allowed to shine through, and it flashes definitely more vibrant. Few of the baits here, and I got more on the way to talk about as well, but go over these quick. The Streaks Curly Tails, it's a great small presentation this time of the year that has a lot of action when working it slow. Works great on a jig head. The Minnows is just as well as a great smaller finger mullet presentation. I'll rig that on a small swim bait, weighted swim bait hook, or a jig head as well. And I know I talk about slow presentation. And you know, why has he got a spinnerbait on here? That's not slow. Well, if you can effectively fish this real slow. Just give it a slow, steady reel to it, and it will just slowly pulsate through the water. I will also lightly jig these smaller spinnerbaits as well. Sometimes it mimics a crab-looking thing. It mimics a small school of mullet coming through. If you work it slowly and effectively, it's a good way that you might can trigger a bite whereas you might not with another bait. So just keep it slow with the spinnerbait. Slim swims, I'm glad I put this in here. I thought I forgot. This is one of the best baits out for pre-front, cold front, winter conditions, whatever. The Charleston community, South Carolina, Inshore has really embraced this bait, along with down the east coast of Florida as well. Georgia, it's a small presentation of a very slim swim bait, and I'll rig this on a lightweight jig head. It's going to mimic your smaller minnows perfectly. Especially some of those early glass minnows that might be coming in with the late winter, early spring as well. And I catch more fish on this bait in the winter or early spring than any other bait out there. The grassy prawn color's good, but you can't go wrong with any of the colors, of course. They're all great natural colors. You can get, you know, as vibrant as you'd like. You can get more as natural as you like. That's a great bait. The Scented Paddlerz, this is going to be a little bit bigger, so I won't throw this often because there's a lot of times these fish during these pre-front conditions, they can care less about pouncing on a big swim bait. But this is a true finger mullet size bait here. So if I really am seeing a lot of big, you know, decent sized finger mullet and schools on the flats with some reds working them in the area, I'm definitely going to have one of these tied on. It just looks so great, so natural to the bait, the smoky shad color. I hardly ever venture away from this color. It's just my personal favorite. And it just looks so much like a mullet, and the action on it, as you can see, it has the ridges on the tail there. It allows it to have a lot of movement. That Elazitech really dances and comes to life under the water. Jig head, swim bait hook, it doesn't really matter. I'll use a jig head if I'm going to really be working, I guess, all of the water column, because I can bring it up and let it slowly fall down to the bottom, bring it up. With the swim bait hook, I'm going to be actively swimming it in one or the other parts of the water column. It's just two ways to set that up. Again, always have it, but, you know, I don't ever, you know, primarily go out and use this bait as I would the slim swims. Skimmers jig and the flats jig. Jigs are great. Just don't overdo it with the weight on these things. Keep it light, keep it slow. But working this on the flats, or even for trout as well, and it makes a great trailer for a spinnerbait just by using spinner blades and tie it on. But anyways, working this jig on the flats and your deeper holes and such, you know, using different weights for different situations, it just pulsates so great in the water, and it sells itself to the fish. It really does. That's another bait I'm definitely going to have tied on for these situations. The trout trick, I'll kind of work this a lot like I'm fishing for largemouth bass using a Texas rig or a jig head. It just works really great on the bottom. Gives a great subtle presentation. I'll almost work it kind of like a shaky head, like a freshwater bass fisherman would, and slowly working this bait around structure for sure, whether that be in a particular spot of the deep hole next to an oyster bar, and just work it within like a 5-foot radius. Just sit there and work where I know fish are there, and, you know, it might entice that bite. More towards a little deeper water on this one, and if I'm targeting a school of reds and, you know, a foot of water, I'm probably not going to use this, but anything a little deeper than that, you can work this effectively right in the fish that they're in, not spook them, and they'll really pounce on this bait. All right, setting up for success. I've touched base on the water column a little bit, and that's very important. And I had a school of reds the other day at high tide on a flat. It warmed up, sunny, and I mean, there was a lot. It was like 40 or 50 fish in there, and I hadn't been to this spot, you know, but maybe 2 or 3 times in the past year. Just wanted to check it out, and I had a a good friend on the boat. So just having a little fun, going back to some old stomping grounds. And we had some particular baits on, but I think it was only like fishing the top part of the water column, and they were in the middle. And it was kind of hard for us to see. We were on our casting platforms, but we just couldn't get a strike from them. And, you know, we tied on something a little bit heavier, tossed it out there. It hit that middle of the water column, and bam, I mean, they were eating like crazy. So that much of a difference can be, you know, a good day or a bad day. It's crazy. From where I was standing, it looks like they were just under the water on the top, but we went a little bit deeper. That's where they were at, where they were focusing on it, feeding. So, you know, having baits, different weights and stuff, especially for this time of year, working it slowly, different parts of the water column, top, middle, bottom. You know, a lot of people just go out with one bait, one weight, and, you know, is what it is. But it's nice to have different weights and presentations for fishing different parts of the water column. The setups I use, your basic 3,000, 4,000 reels. You can even use 2,500. I'll use a lot of 2,500s for the trout setups as well. Bait casters, low profile, of course. Make sure it has a good gear ratio. Rods for spinning, I'm using 7-foot, medium light, medium fast tips, and casting 7-foot, medium fast tips. With the 2,500 reels I was talking about for the trout, though, I will go down to like a 6'6" rod a lot of times, keeping it light if I'm fishing in tight somewhere. It's a great little rod for the trout. You're not overdoing it. Makes the trout feel bigger than they are. It's a good little setup as well. The fishing lines I'm using, you know, braided fishing lines. I put 15, 20, and 30, but I'll throw 10 on there, especially if it's a 2,000 or 2,500 reel. Fluorocarbon leader, I'm always using 20. I would actually leave the 30-pound altogether out of there, especially for what I was talking about in this time of the year. Definitely fluorocarbon leader material is great, especially if you're using braid, and I highly recommend using braid. Braid has zero stretch, and fluorocarbon is very abrasion resistant. It does have a little bit of stretch, not as much as monofilament, so it really hangs in there, but it's great for hook sets, for one thing. It's a little more forgiving. You're not ripping completely through their mouth, and you can miss a lot of fish with just straight braid at times. Not that I don't do that at times. I'm not stepping on any toes, but fluorocarbon leader has its advantages to using it. Some knots I use, this is quick. You can go to a website. It's called netknots.com. It's a website I use I'll even send people different knots, or, you know, edit my presentations or look up new knots myself. It's great. Fluorocarbon leader to braided line, I use double uni knot. I know there's other knots out there, tons of knots. People always ask me or try to push me to use another knot. It's tried and true. If it ain't broke, I'm not fixing it. I like it. I trust it. Sticking with that. For spinner baits and spoons, I'm using improved clinch knots. That's hard baits. Knots for Texas rig baits, like with the bait I showed earlier, fishing Texas rig style. I usually use a flipping hook, and I'll use a snail knot the uni knot version of the snail knot to tie to the shank of the hook. It really helps out with setting the hook and getting them out of tight situations. Just when that lead bullet jig hit, or the lead weight, the bullet weight, when you set the hook and it hits the top of that, the shaft of the hook where the snail knot's tied, it actually puts the hook in a hook setting position. Just a great setup there. And for swim bait hooks, crankbaits, a lot of other hard baits we didn't talk about, the non-slip loop knot is a great knot to use. It just allows, especially the swim baits, to have a little bit more action and freedom to move around as well. All right, I think we went through that pretty quickly, so I know you got some questions. I appreciate you all for attending. Again, I'm Capt. Stephen Fields. Definitely make sure to visit charlestonfishingcompany.com, fieldsfishing.com, on my Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. A lot of great information up there. And definitely visit navionics.com often. Join the mailing list. There's tons of great upcoming webinars that you can register and view. Not only do I conduct these webinars myself, but I actually listen a lot and attend a lot of these webinars live. there's just a lot of wealth of knowledge out there. And, the day you stop learning, I need to quit fishing. So, and I appreciate again ZMAN helping co-market this webinar and throwing in a nice goodie bag and a ZMAN fishing hat to one lucky live attendee, which I will pick, and I will send you a message at the end of the webinar. So stay on. And it's question time. What you got? Questions and answers. So if you have any questions, definitely shoot them at me now, and I'll answer them. All right, Joe, what are your preferred methods of fishing with heavy structure? Or I guess you're asking, what baits do I use? How do I go about it? Of course, fishing heavy structure, I've definitely got my braided line on. I'm going to probably have, 20 to 30 pound braided line set up, 4,000 reel. I'm going to use probably, stick 20 to 30 pound fluorocarbon. That Texas rig setup I was showing you about is a great rig to fish heavy structure with. Weedless swim bait hook with the swimmers on there is another great setup for bringing it through grass, oysters. Downscan overlay, do you use it? I use downscan. Yes, I do. How does high pressure affect lure selection? Kind of the same way. I'm gonna stick to slowing it down because the different pressures and fronts coming through, they affect the fish the same way. It's change, so they're going to adapt to it. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there. I love fishing the trout trick, but often find myself having a hard time around structure with losing tackle. You're just going to lose tackle. I lose a ton of tackle. When I'm on my guide trips, I'm constantly telling my clients, don't worry about getting hung up or losing a bait. I would have lost 10 personally by now. So if I know I'm getting down and dirty and I'm definitely going to be doing some serious catching around some heavy structure, I'm going to have what I want tied on multiple rods because I know I'm going to lose something. You got to lose to win. Do you think the information for trout would stand for Pacific Northwest salmon? I have no idea, but, I wouldn't mind getting out there and figuring it out with you. Let me know. Let me know if it works. I use a lot of bass techniques for redfish and trout, so give it a shot. When do you find using live bait better than artificials? I'm an artificial kind of guy. When I'm out for fun, tournaments, whatever, I'll just stick with artificials. I'm a freshwater bass fisherman growing up, but I live so close to saltwater, it just attracted me, and I switched over, but it stuck with me. I just use artificials. But on charters and stuff, live bait, or if I'm definitely offshore, near shore, I use live bait. Don't get me wrong, as much as I like to use artificials, there are days that live bait would have kicked my tail inshore, and I should have had it. But, you definitely can't go wrong with taking out live bait during these fronts. It's going to do well. I'd recommend finger mullet or minnows. Usually on charters during these fronts, all I got to have is mud minnows or coca hole minnows, like the Gulf Coast guys call them. They're very effective, and they do the job. How do you find flats on the internet? What I am looking for on the Navionics app and Google Earth. Yeah, so if you go to navionics.com, they have the free online chart viewers, the same great Navionics Plus charts that you would get on the boating app or that you would have on your chart plotter. Google Earth, another great way. Definitely use everything to your advantage. Do you get to the flats before the tide comes in and wait? Yes, I'm always going to get there early. When I'm scouting, and this, might not be the chance that everybody gets to, because you might only have one day out there, but I'll spend a lot of time just looking and not casting or fishing and just paying attention to how bait moves around, what bait's there, how the fish moving on and off the flats. But I'll definitely get to the flats before the tide goes or comes. I always shut down way ahead of time, especially if I know there's fish there, and I'll ease in. You know, I'm known to be bad about getting right on top of fish a lot of times and spooking them. It just, you know, I've learned to stay off and just take my time, be patient. Do I use top waters in the cold? Not too much. I wait for it to warm up for that. We're not too far away from that now, but the fish were eating so well the other day, and again, it was pre-front conditions with this front coming through, and we were catching them so good. I tried to act all big and bad in front of my clients. So like, watch this, we're gonna have some fun. Man, I couldn't get a single one of those fish to hit a top water, and I was throwing around about 60 reds sitting out there actively feeding. They could throw out a mud minnow on a jig head and do well. When you talk about lethargic fish, have you figured out the temperature threshold that produces this behavior? Adversely, what is the warmer temperature that seems to make them want to feed? I guess during these fronts like we just had, with it coming late winter and early spring, and it's totally different than that fall. We want that temperature to get down into the 50s, you know. But when it's coming to these fronts and pre-fronts this time of the year, usually the temperature threshold that produces this behavior is going to be, as far as them becoming lethargic, is going to usually be in the 50s somewhere, 50s. And it just seems to put them in a bad mood, especially if it started to warm up a little bit and that water cools back off. Hopefully we don't have any more of that. And then, you know, I've seen the sun, or when the tide comes in and the sun's allowed to warm up the water on the flats, you'll get it into the 60s, close to 70. That's been the temperature lately. I think 2 days ago it was like 70, 71. They turned on like that. And when that tide went all the way out, that water cooled off to mid 60s. And I'm sure it dropped a little bit lower than that, and it kind of shut down. What is your search pattern when you go to an area for the first time? I'm doing a lot of looking and paying attention. I will usually, it just depends. If sight fishing's good, I will go into it staying off, you know, taking my time, not doing a lot of blind casting, doing a lot of looking, being selective on my casts. But, you know, if it's a little cloudy or a little breezy and sight fishing's to a minimum, I will take some search baits out there, some swim baits, any of the ones I just mentioned, or slow rolling a spinner bait, and just kind of seeing what I can stir up or even get a bite of. Where I live in North Carolina, the nearest fishing is on the Neuse River. Would you still look for flats? For what kind of structure would you look for? Yeah, the Neuse is going to be a little bit different, of course. There's rivers around, you know, South Carolina, like the Sand Pit up in Georgetown. It's a little different, but you know, and there can be small flats on the Neuse, as I'm sure you know. You know, and it's going to be a lot more mud than anything else. So definitely just paying attention to which areas have more structure on it. A lot of times in these certain rivers, everything's going to be the same on the banks. It's just going to be a bank. And anything that's different about those banks, whether it be some sort of cypress knee or an oyster bar or a log or a tree on that bank, they're going to hold around that. Do you look for potholes in the flats for sea trout in the winter or year-round? Pretty much year-round for the potholes in the holes, especially like South Florida. That's pretty year-round down there. Up here, our potholes are minimal on our flats on the east coast of South Carolina. But once you get down into Florida and stuff like that, you get a lot of those holes and potholes in the grass flats, and it's just very effective to always work them. I've caught fish down there year-round fishing the potholes, man. Do you change your color presentation with watercolors? Yep, sure will. So a lot of coffee water from rivers dumping in the ICW. I'm definitely using something more opaque, solid, something light's going to bounce off of, darker colors. And that doesn't mean you have to go black or dark green. Just, you know, a solid white will do the trick. It just depends how it looks to you in the water. Now I'm with you on the darker patterns that you know, I'm definitely a big fan of like natural solid colors. The reds spook easier because the water is cold. Yeah, a lot of times they do. They can feel the pressure of your boat coming. That's so I'll, you know, that comes from experience, especially when I'm targeting flats and areas like that. I know how the fish are going to be positioned. Usually, everything changes sometimes, and I'll know how to approach these fish, from what angles to approach these fish. But a lot of times, I mean, with these fronts and everything, you know, the cooler water temperatures and air temperatures, stuff like that, I find a lot of these cooler reds, they're not spooky, and they're definitely not interested in my bait when that happens. So if there's some fish that are actually moving around and are aware and are a little bit more spooky, they'll usually eat as long as you present it correctly. Could these same techniques be applied to striped bass in early April in the Northeast? Oh, I'm sure, no doubt, especially like the swim baits, you know, sizing it down. No doubt about that. We have a great striped bass guy, Anthony Grassi, good fisherman up there in the Northeast with striped bass. You know, he's got some webinars out there, does a great job, very knowledgeable. I've been meaning to get up there and do some fishing with him myself. With the dirty water that's typical in Charleston, how shallow are you looking for in order to sight fish? How shallow would the fish go? Yeah, I mean, it just depends a lot of times with our dirty water. So Stone Oaks definitely get more coffee colored, but it's dirty. It's not like tannic where it looks dirty, but you can see through it. So, I mean, there's a lot of times I can't sight fish at all there. Wando River in Charleston, you know, you can sight fish fairly well in like 4 foot of water, no problem. So, you know, it just depends on the water clarity and how shallow will the fish go. It depends. I mean, if it's real cold, they're going to stay, you know, wait till that sun warms up the flats to get real shallow and get active, or they're going to tend to stay a little bit deeper. And that could be the edges of the flats, the nearest deep water access, bends and creeks, holes in creeks, stuff like that. I just moved to Beaufort from California. What's the best advice you can give me for the area for speckled trout? I spend a fair amount of time on the Hobie kayak. And man, the Hobie kayak is an effective tool. No, any kayak's an effective tool, no doubt. You can go where you want, whenever you want. It's a great inshore shallow water tool. I don't use mine enough. I got kids outside. I don't get to go play as much in the kayak as I used to, but best advice I can give you, pick you up a top spot map of the area. You know, definitely have, you know, think about getting the boating app on your smart device. Use the free chart viewer online. Put it all together. You know, look at all the areas, what appeals to you. That's, you know, you definitely want to have some charts and some knowledge going into it. But, you know, pay attention to a lot of, for trout, definitely, especially this time of the year, leading into spring, feeder creeks, closer to the inlets. That doesn't mean you have to get right at the ocean, just, you know, not too far in the backwaters. Usually those feeder creeks, the mouths of those feeder creeks are going to produce fish, you know, getting up into the creeks, your deep holes in the creeks, which using sonar charts on the app and on your charts will be able to point those out to you. That's what I'd say. I fish in a man-made bay, no structure, sandy bottom, and lots of kelp. Should I be hitting the bottom with baits or stick to the top of the column? I mean, if they're down in the kelp or down in the grass, you use stuff to get in there with them. Make sure you have something that's weedless to bring through there. Definitely a swim bait hook with a swim bait. I would slowly move through there. You know, and you just, you know, working all the parts of the water column. Just depends where the fish are and where you get the bites. Do you throw mirror lure or hard baits often? Oh, I throw hard baits all the time. I just don't use them a ton this time of the year. I will throw a spoon. I left that out. I will throw a spoon. You can slow roll a spoon just like a spinner bait, especially late winter, early spring when the crabs are molting, getting their new shells. I highly recommend tying a spoon on and slowly working it. It's a great, it mimics a crab great, especially if it's slow rolled on the bottom. All right. I guess that's all the questions. And I have randomly selected a name for the to be the winner for the free goodie bag from ZMAN Baits, as well as the fishing hat, Mark Burton. So, Mark, if you could send me a chat or a message, and I will definitely get your address, and we'll get that out to you. All right. I appreciate all you guys attending. It's been a great webinar, good participation, great questions. If I didn't answer your questions, you should have my email address. Definitely feel free to shoot that out to me, and I'll answer it. But I appreciate all you guys attending. Definitely attend more webinars coming up in the future. And tight lines to you.